You've seen the movies, you've watched the documentaries. You probably know that on April 15th, 1912, the RMS Titanic slipped beneath the North Atlantic and took over 1,500 souls with her. That story has been told so many times in James Cameron's blockbuster, in Ken Burns' documentaries, in museum exhibitions, in books that line entire shelves, that most of us feel like we were practically there on the deck ourselves. But here's what those movies never told you. Titanic was not the first ship flying the White Star Line flag to vanish into the deep, and she wasn't the last. White Star Line was built on ambition, the kind that makes men believe they can outrun fate. Under Thomas Ismay, the company clawed its way back from bankruptcy in the 1860s and reinvented itself as the gold standard of ocean travel, where size and luxury weren't just selling points, they were a religion. The bigger the ship, the safer the passengers, or so they believed. So why did this company, the very symbol of maritime prestige, leave behind a trail of ships resting on the ocean floor? Bad luck, reckless ambition, or something that no insurance policy could ever cover? Let's find out. This is one wave away. Let's start with SS Naronic. When Naronic slid into the water in May of 1892, she was the largest cargo vessel in the world, 470 feet long, weighing in at over 6,500 tons and costing White Star Line a staggering £121,000 to build. But what made her truly unusual wasn't her size, it was her cargo. Naronic was designed to carry livestock, specifically high-end cattle, transported from the United States back to England. And White Star Line, being White Star Line, didn't do this halfway. Instead of the cramped, filthy conditions that most livestock ships offered, Naronic was fitted with modern stalls, clean water systems, and proper ventilation. The company wanted their cattle to arrive happy and healthy, because healthy cattle meant better profit, and better profit meant everything. It was luxury even for the animals. She carried a small number of human passengers, 2 officially. 12, though records suggest 14 were actually aboard for her final voyage. Most of them were professional livestock handlers, men who made their living crossing the Atlantic with animals in their care. Nobody famous, nobody whose name would end up in history books. Just ordinary men doing an ordinary job on what should have been an ordinary crossing. On February 11th, 1893, Naronic left Liverpool bound for New York, carrying 60 crew and those 14 passengers. She passed her harbour pilot at Linus Point off the coast of Wales, and that was the last confirmed sighting of her ever. After that, nothing. No distress signal, because wireless radio wouldn't exist for another decade. No wreckage washing ashore, no bodies, just open ocean and silence. At first, nobody panicked. Late arrivals were common in the 1890s. Bad weather could push a crossing back by a week or two, and nobody thought much of it. But then, Naronic's sister shipped the Bovic, which had left Liverpool 6 days after Naronic arrived safely in New York, and Naronic still hadn't appeared. That's when the dread set in. The only physical trace ever found came on March 4th, 1893, when the steamship SS Coventry discovered two of Naronic's lifeboats drifting roughly 500 miles east of Halifax. One was capsized. The other was waterlogged, but still floating, its oars lashed together like a makeshift sea anchor. Both were completely empty. No survivors, no bodies, no clues, just two boats alone on the Atlantic telling a story that nobody could fully read. And then the bottles started washing ashore. Over the following months, 4 messages were found sealed inside bottles along the coastline, each one claiming to be a final note from someone aboard Naronic. The most chilling came from a man who signed his name John Olson. His message, found inside a champagne bottle in Virginia on March 30th, read, 3:10 a.m. February 19th, SS Naronic is sinking fast. We struck an iceberg in a blinding snowstorm. The ship is now on her side. Goodbye to all. Another note, signed by someone calling themselves L. Winchell, was found in New York and read simply, Naronic is going down. Everyone is praying. God have mercy. A third signed only young, washed up near the Irish Sea. A fourth, marked with just the letter T, was pulled from the River Mersey in September of that same year, carrying 3 words, all is lost. White Star Line rejected every single one of them. Their reasoning was straightforward. None of the names Olson, Winchell, Young appeared on any official passenger or crew manifest. The first bottle had appeared in New York suspiciously close to when newspapers first broke the story of Naronic's disappearance. The company called it a hoax, a cruel joke from people with too much imagination and too little conscience. But here's the thing. Crew manifests on cargo ships in the 1890s were notoriously incomplete. Last-minute additions, informal hires, men who signed on under different names, none of this was unusual. And Olson's letter contained a specific detail that stopped investigators cold. It named White Star Line's exact New York agents correctly with no error. That's not the kind of detail a random hoaxer pulls out of thin air. That's the kind of detail someone who actually worked for the company would know. So what really happened to Naronic? The theories have piled up over the years, and none of them are comfortable. The most widely accepted is that she struck an iceberg, the same North Atlantic ice fields that would claim Titanic 19 years later in almost the same waters. Other ships had reported heavy ice in that corridor during February of 1893, and if Olson's letter was genuine, the timeline fits almost perfectly. But there's another theory that keeps resurfacing, and it's darker. Naronic's cargo hold wasn't just cattle, she was also carrying industrial chemicals, including potassium chlorate, sodium sulfide, and calcium hypochlorite. These are substances that under normal conditions are perfectly stable. But a violent storm, broken containers, and the wrong chemical combination could produce something far less stable. Some investigators believed a catastrophic explosion below deck could have sunk Naronic so quickly that no one had time to launch a single lifeboat, which would explain why the 2 boats found by SS Coventry showed no signs of being deliberately launched. They simply floated free as the ship went under. There was even a brief sensational claim a decade later from a man named Gessler Rousseau, who told newspapers he had personally placed a bomb aboard Naronic to destroy her. The press lapped it up until someone pointed out that Rousseau had been in the United States at the time of the sailing, making the claim physically impossible. Another dead end. To this day, the wreck of SS Naronic has never been found. 74 people walked onto that ship in Liverpool in February of 1893, and not one of them was ever seen again. No confirmed wreckage, no confirmed cause, no confirmed anything, just 2 empty lifeboats, 4 letters in bottles, and a question mark sitting at the bottom of the North Atlantic. And this was only the beginning of White Star Line's long, complicated relationship with the deep. If Naronic was the disaster nobody heard about, then RMS Republic was the one that made the world believe everything was going to be fine. And that belief, as it turned out, would cost 1,500 lives 3 years later. Republic wasn't always a White Star Line ship. She started life as the SS Columbus, owned by the Dominion Line, before being acquired and renamed in 1903. Under her new flag, she found her calling on the route between New York and the Mediterranean, carrying wealthy Americans eastward on their European grand tours and bringing thousands of immigrants and refugees westward toward a new life. She was, in the truest sense, a ship of 2 worlds. The press had taken to calling her the Millionaire's Special, and the name stuck. It was part flattery, part marketing. Republic wasn't quite in the same league as the grandest ocean liners of her era, but she offered genuine comfort and a reputation for safety that made her a favorite among the well-heeled. If you had money and taste and wanted a reliable crossing, Republic was your ship. That reputation was about to get tested in the worst possible way. In the early hours of January 23rd, 1909, Republic was moving through heavy fog roughly 26 miles from the Nantucket Lightship, a stretch of ocean so congested with maritime traffic that sailors had nicknamed it the Times Square of the seas. Visibility was essentially zero. Captain Sealby had ordered a course correction, and the ship's horn was sounding its fog warnings into the dark, but fog doesn't care about warnings. Coming from the opposite direction was the SS Florida, a smaller Italian liner packed with refugees fleeing the aftermath of the devastating Messina earthquake. Both ships were effectively blind. Captain Sealby ordered a hard turn to avoid a collision, but somewhere in the chaos of signals and panic, the crew of Florida turned the wrong way directly into Republic's portside. The bow of the Florida punched clean through Republic's engine rooms and first-class cabins. 2 passengers on Republic and 3 sailors on Florida died on impact. The ship was taking on water fast, and the power was gone. In the darkness and the cold, with the vessel groaning around him, a 24-year-old wireless operator named Jack Binns made a decision that would change maritime history. His radio room had been partially destroyed in the collision. There was no electricity. Most men in that situation would have grabbed a life jacket and headed for the deck. Instead, Binns climbed down into the flooding engine room. In the pitch black, located the emergency battery reserves, dragged them back up, and got his equipment running again. Then he sat down and started transmitting, tapping out the letters CQD into the dark Atlantic air, his teeth chattering so hard from the cold that he could barely keep his hands steady. CQD was the distress call of the era, and this was the first time in history it had ever been used to coordinate a large-scale maritime rescue. The signal was picked up by the Searsconset wireless station, and from there it reached RMS Baltic, another White Star Line vessel 90 miles away. Baltic's response came back almost immediately. "Don't worry, old man. We're pushing our boilers as hard as they'll go." Binns kept transmitting. For hours in the dark and the cold, he stayed at that station, while the ship slowly died around him. Finding Republic in that fog was its own nightmare. Baltic spent hours searching, firing signal rockets into the murk and listening for a response. It was Binns's trained ear that finally made the difference. He caught the direction of one of Baltic's rockets through his headset and radioed the correction that guided the rescue ship in. What followed was one of the most remarkable operations in the history of ocean travel. 83 lifeboat trips back and forth between the ships in fog in the dark, transferring 1,500 passengers and crew from both Republic and Florida to Baltic without losing a single additional life. Jack Binns became a celebrity overnight. Newspapers ran his photograph on the front page. He was called a hero, a marvel, the man who proved that wireless technology could save lives at sea. He was 24 years old and he had earned every word of it. Republic herself sank the following day, settling to the bottom about 270 feet down, and she may have taken something extraordinary with her. There's a persistent theory, never fully confirmed and never fully dismissed, that Republic was carrying a military payroll destined for the US Navy's Great White Fleet, somewhere in the range of $250,000 in gold coins, plus an additional $3 million in double eagle gold pieces. At today's values, that's well over $1 billion sitting in a wreck on the ocean floor. The wreck was located in 1981, but the cargo holds have never been successfully accessed. The gold, if it exists, is still down there. But here's the part of the Republic story that history tends to overlook, because it's less comfortable than the heroism. The rescue worked spectacularly, almost impossibly well. And that success taught the maritime industry exactly the wrong lesson. What the industry took away from the Republic disaster was this: modern ships with watertight compartments could stay afloat long enough for wireless to summon help, and lifeboats were just ferries to move people between ships. You didn't need one for every person on board because there would always be another vessel nearby to take them. It was a reasonable conclusion to draw from what had just happened. It was also catastrophically wrong. 3 years later, when White Star Line launched the largest ship in the world, they equipped her with enough lifeboats for roughly half the people on board, and they were entirely confident that was sufficient. After all, hadn't Republic proven that wireless could summon rescue in time? Hadn't 1,500 people been saved without a lifeboat for every soul? The men who made those decisions weren't monsters. They were men who had learned the wrong lesson from a genuine miracle, and they built that lesson into the hull of a ship called Titanic. You already know this story, or you think you do. RMS Titanic was the crown jewel of the Olympic class, the largest, most luxurious ship ever built, the physical embodiment of everything White Star Line believed about itself. She carried a swimming pool, a squash court, a Turkish bath, and a first-class dining saloon that made the finest restaurants in London look modest. And she carried something else too, a reputation carefully cultivated and eagerly repeated that her watertight compartment design made her, in the words of the trade press, practically unsinkable. We've already seen where that kind of confidence comes from. The Republic rescue had convinced an entire industry that modern engineering had effectively conquered the sea. Titanic carried 20 lifeboats, more than British law required at the time, and her designers genuinely believed that was enough, because in their minds, lifeboats weren't for survival. They were for the short ferry ride to the rescue ship that wireless would summon in time. At 11:40 p.m. on April 14, 1912, Titanic struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic. 2 hours and 40 minutes later, she was gone, taking 1,517 people with her on her very first voyage. The unsinkable ship had sunk, and the world needed someone to blame. That someone was J. Bruce Ismay. Ismay was the chairman of White Star Line, and he had been aboard Titanic that night. He survived, and that survival in the court of public opinion was his crime. The press descended on him like wolves, but none more viciously than the papers owned by William Randolph Hearst. There was history between these two men years earlier. Ismay had rebuffed Hearst's attempts to do business together, reportedly disgusted by his tabloid style of journalism. Hearst had a long memory, and now he had the story of the century to work with. The New York American ran headlines calling him J. Brute Ismay. The accusations piled up fast that he had pressured Captain Smith to push the ship faster, to make headlines that he had cut corners on safety, to save money, that he had shoved women and children aside to claim a spot on a lifeboat. The image stuck the coward in the suit, saving his own skin while 1,500 people drowned around him. The actual record tells a different story. Ismay was one of the first people informed that the ship was going to sink, and for the next 2 hours he moved through the decks, actively helping passengers board lifeboats. He stepped into a collapsible boat only after the section of deck he was standing on had emptied entirely. There was genuinely no one left nearby to take his place. Both the American and British inquiries cleared him of wrongdoing. It didn't matter. By the time the findings were published, Hearst's version of Ismay had already become fact in the public mind, and it has stayed there ever since. When Ismay was pulled aboard Carpathia, survivors described a man who was pale-shaking and barely able to speak. He spent the voyage to New York in a cabin, refusing food, unable to face anyone. Whatever really happened on that deck, the weight of it broke him. He retired from public life almost immediately and spent the rest of his days in near-total seclusion, haunted by a story that had been largely written by someone who hated him. While Ismay's reputation was being destroyed in the press, something genuinely heroic was happening 58 miles away. Captain Arthur Rostron of the Cunard liner Carpathia received Titanic's distress signal at 12:25 in the morning and made a decision instantly, full speed straight into an ice field in the dark. He ordered all heating and hot water cut off across the ship to redirect every ounce of steam pressure to the engines. A vessel designed to cruise at 14 knots was pushed to 15, then 16. His officers thought he was going to kill them all. He kept going anyway. Carpathia threaded through field ice and towering bergs for 3.5 hours without slowing down. Rostron later said he felt as though another hand had been guiding his helm that night, and given what he accomplished without hitting a single piece of ice in complete darkness, it's hard to argue with him. He arrived at 4 a.m. and by 8:30 that morning, 705 survivors were aboard. It was the only miracle of that night. Titanic's legacy rewrote maritime law permanently. Every ship would now be required to carry enough lifeboats for every single person on board, no exceptions. Wireless operators would stand watch 24 hours a day because the nearby Californian had been close enough to help, but her wireless operator had gone to sleep and she stood still in the dark while people died. The International Ice Patrol was established to track and report icebergs along the North Atlantic shipping lanes, a service that still operates today. These were the lessons written in the coldest possible ink, but they came too late for 1,500 people who should never have had to teach them. After Titanic White Star Line had a third ship still sitting in the shipyard hull, number 433, and they weren't going to make the same mistakes twice. Every lesson written in cold water and human lives was built directly into her design. The new ship was fitted with a double skin of steel running along her interior hull so that if the outer layer was breached, flooding would be contained in the gap between the two walls. Her watertight bulkheads were raised all the way up to B deck compared to Titanic's E deck, meaning she could theoretically stay afloat with 6 compartments fully flooded. To accommodate that extra steel without shrinking her engine rooms, she was built nearly 3 feet wider than Titanic, and those enormous gantry davits lining her upper decks could swing lifeboats out and lower them even if the ship was listing heavily, a direct answer to one of the most devastating failures of April 1912. She was supposed to be the safest ocean liner ever built. She was supposed to carry first-class passengers in staterooms with private bathrooms, dine them in dining rooms finer than anything Titanic had offered, and serenade them with a full pipe organ. She was going to be called Britannic, and she was going to be magnificent. She never carried a single paying passenger. By the time Britannic was ready to sail in late 1915, the world was at war, and the British military needed hospital ships far more than it needed luxury liners. Britannic was repainted white from bow to stern with wide green stripes and 3 massive red crosses on each side, the international markings of a non-combatant vessel under the Hague Convention. She made 5 successful voyages evacuating wounded soldiers from the Aegean. On her 6th, she ran out of luck. On the morning of November 21st, 1916, Britannic was passing through the Key Channel off the coast of Greece when a massive explosion tore through her bow section, a mine laid weeks earlier by the German submarine U-73 had found her. She began flooding immediately and listing hard to starboard. Captain Bartlett made a decision: keep the engines running and drive the ship toward the nearby island of Key, grounding her in shallow water and saving as many lives as possible. It was a reasonable call, but it had a consequence nobody anticipated. As Britannic drove forward with her bow already sinking, the stern rose higher and higher out of the water, lifting her enormous bronze propellers still turning at full speed above the surface. 2 lifeboats had been lowered without authorization, their crews not waiting for the order. Both were caught in the propeller wash and dragged in. What followed was something that no maritime safety manual had ever thought to plan for: spinning blades the size of a house churning through wood and water and people. 30 lives were lost in those 2 boats alone. Among those in the water that morning was a woman named Violet Jessup. If her name sounds familiar, it should. She had been a stewardess aboard Olympic when that ship collided with HMS Hawke in 1911. She had been a stewardess aboard Titanic when she sank in 1912, surviving the night in a lifeboat while holding a baby someone had thrust into her arms. And now, on Britannic, she jumped from a lifeboat to avoid the propellers, struck her head on the ship's keel underwater, and surfaced bleeding and disoriented but alive. She later discovered she had fractured her skull. She found out only because years later an X-ray told her so. She had simply assumed she had a bad headache and carried on. If there is a single human being who embodies both the catastrophic bad luck and the sheer stubborn survival instinct that defines this entire era of White Star Line history, it's Violet Jessup. Britannic sank in 55 minutes, far faster than Titanic's 2 hours and 40, despite being the more heavily reinforced ship. The reason came down to something almost unbearably mundane. That morning, nurses aboard the hospital ship had opened the porthole windows along the lower decks to let in fresh air for the patients. As the ship listed and the bow dipped, seawater poured directly through those open windows into compartments above the watertight bulkheads, bypassing every safety feature the engineers had so carefully designed. 4 open portholes alone could flood the ship as fast as the iceberg had flooded Titanic. The safest ship ever built was defeated not by a weapon or a storm, but by open windows on a calm morning. Of the 1,036 people aboard, 1,006 survived a far better outcome than Titanic, in part because the lessons of 1912 had been learned, and the lifeboats were there, and the water was warmer. But 30 people were still dead. The 3rd great ship of the Olympic class was on the bottom of the Aegean, and White Star Line's story still wasn't finished breaking. Every empire ends. White Star Line's ending just took longer than most, and it was messier than anyone wanted to admit. The First World War took 1/3 of the company's fleet, 10 ships gone, including Britannic, the Oceanic, and the Arabic. The company was patched back together with German vessels seized as war reparations, including the massive Majestic, formerly the Bismarck, which was its own particular kind of irony. But the damage ran deeper than ships. J. Bruce Ismay had resigned in the aftermath of Titanic, and the men who followed him were, to put it plainly, not up to the task. The most damaging was Lord Kylesant, who took control of the company in 1926 and spent years falsifying financial records to hide just how badly White Star Line was hemorrhaging money. He was arrested in 1931 and sent to prison for fraud, leaving behind a company that was by any honest accounting already dead. The Great Depression had evaporated passenger numbers across the entire industry, and White Star Line had nothing left in reserve to weather it. The British government offered a lifeline, but it came with a condition: White Star would have to merge with its oldest rival Cunard. On May 10, 1934, Cunard White Star Limited was formed, with Cunard holding 62% of the shares. The White Star name limped on for another 16 years before being quietly retired in 1950. The flag came down, and that was that. So what do we make of all this A company that rose from bankruptcy to become the most recognized name in ocean travel, then spent decades leaving ships on the ocean floor? Was it cursed, as we asked at the beginning, or was it something more complicated than a curse? The honest answer is that White Star Line was a company that kept reaching beyond what it fully understood, building ships bigger and faster than the technology of the time could reliably support, operating in conditions that punished any margin of error and occasionally mistaking ambition for safety. Naronic vanished without explanation. Republic was saved by a miracle and taught everyone the wrong lesson. Titanic proved that confidence is not the same thing as competence. Britannic, the safest ship ever built, was undone by open windows on a calm morning. And yet, every one of those disasters changed something. Jack Binns, sitting in the dark on Republic, tapping out CQD on a battery-powered radio, gave the world its first proof that wireless could save lives at sea, and laid the foundation for every maritime distress system that followed. Titanic's 1,500 dead forced governments to rewrite the rules. Enough lifeboats for everyone radio watches around the clock the International Ice Patrol that still monitors the North Atlantic today. Even Britannic's double hull and reinforced bulkheads became the blueprint for safer ship design for generations to come. The ships themselves are still down there, and they are in their own strange way still working. Titanic rests at nearly 12,500 feet, her grand staircase long gone, but her hull still holding secrets that researchers are only beginning to understand. Britannic lies in just 400 feet of water off the coast of Greece, one of the most intact large shipwrecks in the world, visited every year by divers who swim through her hospital wards and engine rooms like they're walking through a stopped clock. These wrecks don't just preserve history, they are history sealed in pressure and cold, waiting to be read. Every year, on April 15th, Cunard, the company that absorbed what was left of White Star Line, flies the old flag in remembrance. A small gesture, maybe, but it means that somewhere in the world, on the anniversary of the night, 1,500 people died in the North Atlantic. Someone still thinks it's worth remembering where all of this came from and what it cost. Naronic, Republic, Titanic, Britannic. 4 ships, 4 disasters, one company that left its mark on the bottom of the ocean and the top of every maritime safety manual ever written since. Whether that's a curse or a legacy probably depends on whether you're reading this from dry land or from somewhere considerably further down.